We want to apologize to anyone who will see this video. We apologize that this came to what we can call late, but then it's for a purpose. God knows why it should be shared now. This is more reason why we admonish everyone to watch this to the end to fully understand this message and get prepared, for it will begin in 2 days from now, yes, 2 days. It won't cost you anything to kindly tell us where you are connecting from so that we can connect as family and continue praying for you where you are. Our prayer team will be in the comments section as well to write down prayer points you will be stating if you desire, so they can join you in prayers as always. I will begin reading today's experience. My name is Dr. Marcus Webb, and for 32 years I taught comparative religion at a prestigious university in New England. I held 3 doctoral degrees, published 17 books, and lectured in 43 countries about the world's faith systems. I considered myself an expert on spirituality, a scholarly observer who could dissect any religious tradition with academic precision and philosophical detachment. I believed knowledge was my fortress, my credentials were my armor, and my intellect was the ladder by which I would ascend to whatever truth existed beyond this mortal plane. I was completely, catastrophically wrong. What I'm about to share will sound impossible to many of my colleagues. They'll dismiss it as oxygen deprivation, hallucination, or the desperate fantasy of a dying brain seeking comfort. Let them their eyes. I know what happened to me on December 24, 2025, and I know what I was shown about the year that's now upon us. If my reputation must be sacrificed to deliver this message, then so be it. Some truths are worth more than tenure. I had this experience on December 24th. My wife Helen had left me 3 years prior, tired of being married to a man who treated ancient texts with more tenderness than he showed his own family. My daughter Emma stopped calling after I missed her wedding to attend a conference in Brussels. My son David hadn't spoken to me in 5 years, not since I told him his newfound Christian faith was simply a psychological crutch for people who couldn't handle existential uncertainty. I was alone, but I told myself I preferred it that way. Solitude was the scholar's natural habitat. I had my books, my research, my legacy of published wisdom. What else did a man need? But now I'm a changed man, thanks to Jesus Christ. That morning, I worked in my study, preparing a lecture on the mythological construct of messianic figures across different cultures. I had a particular section analyzing how the Christ narrative borrowed elements from earlier dying and rising God myths. I was quite proud of it, actually. It was sharp, clinical, thoroughly researched. It reduced the cornerstone of 2 billion people's faith to a derivative literary pattern. Around 2 in the afternoon, I decided to drive to campus. The university library would be nearly empty on Christmas Eve, which meant I could work undisturbed. The snow had been falling since dawn, thick and heavy, turning the Connecticut landscape into a Christmas card scene. But I'd driven in worse conditions. My Volvo had excellent tires, and I drove with the cautious precision I applied to everything in life. I never saw the patch of black ice on the bridge. One moment I was listening to a podcast about Gnostic texts, mentally drafting footnotes for my next paper. The next moment, the car was spinning. I remember the strange, floating sensation as the vehicle pirouetted across the frozen road like a dancer. I remember thinking, with odd clarity, that this was statistically improbable given my speed and the road conditions. Then I remember the guardrail rushing toward me, the sound of metal shrieking, and the peculiar sensation of weightlessness as my car broke through and began its descent toward the frozen river below. The impact was absolute. I felt my ribs crack, felt something sharp pierce my chest cavity, felt my skull connect with the steering wheel with enough force to fracture. The pain was oceanic, drowning everything else. And then, like a light switch being flipped, the pain vanished. I was standing on the ice beside my crumpled car, looking down at my body slumped over the steering wheel, blood spreading across my gray wool sweater in a dark stain. Steam rose from the crushed hood. The only sound was the gentle whisper of falling snow. I felt no panic, which surprised me. I felt no fear. What I felt was a curious sense of relief, as if I'd been holding my breath for 32 years and could finally exhale. I looked at my hands, expecting to see them transparent or ghostly, but they appeared solid, normal. I touched my chest where the steering column had impaled me. No wound. No blood. No pain. I should mention that I didn't believe in an afterlife. I'd written extensively about how consciousness was an emergent property of brain chemistry, how near-death experiences were simply the brain's last desperate firing of neurons, how every religion's description of the beyond was merely wish fulfillment projected onto the void. Standing there beside my corpse, I realized how incredibly stupid I had been. The light came from behind me, warm and golden, completely incongruous with the gray December afternoon. I turned around and he was there. I recognized him immediately, which was strange because I'd never believed he was anything more than a historical rabbi whose story got exaggerated by grieving disciples. Yet standing before him, there was no question, no doubt, no room for academic skepticism. This was Jesus. This was the Christ. This was the one I had spent 3 decades reducing to a footnote in the evolution of religious mythology. He looked nothing like the Renaissance paintings. His skin was darker, weathered by sun and wind. His hands were calloused, the hands of a carpenter who'd spent years working with wood and stone. But his eyes held something that no artist had ever quite captured, a depth that seemed to contain all the sorrow and all the joy that had ever existed, held in perfect, terrible balance. He didn't speak at first. He simply looked at me, and in that gaze I felt my entire life laid bare. Every lecture I'd given that subtly mocked believers. Every time I'd chosen my research over my family. Every moment of pride, every casual cruelty disguised as intellectual honesty, every time I'd valued being right over being kind. I saw it all reflected in his eyes, and I understood that he'd seen it too, had witnessed every moment, and somehow, impossibly, his face held no condemnation. What he showed me next broke something fundamental inside me. He gestured, and suddenly I could see my own heart, not the physical organ but the spiritual reality of it. It was covered in dark spots, ugly stains that spread like oil across its surface. Some were small, petty sins I'd barely remembered committing. Others were large, spreading shadows from years of accumulated pride and calculated indifference. He revealed to me that these spots were the accumulated weight of every lie I'd told, every person I'd hurt with my dismissive arrogance, every time I'd placed my ego above truth. He showed me how I'd wounded my wife with emotional neglect, how I'd crushed my son's faith under the weight of my intellectual superiority, how I'd missed my daughter's wedding because I valued strangers' applause more than her tears of disappointment. Then he did something that made no sense according to any theological system I'd studied. He placed his hand on my chest, and I felt heat, incredible heat, not burning but cleansing. The sensation was overwhelming, like being unmade and remade simultaneously. When he removed his hand, the spots were gone. My heart was clean, luminous, impossibly pure. I looked down at his wrist as he pulled away, and that's when I saw them. The scars. Deep, round wounds that should have healed centuries ago but remained open, permanent marks of an execution I had written countless papers dismissing as either myth or martyrdom misinterpreted by zealous followers. He told me that no amount of human effort could remove those stains. He explained that all my books, all my lectures, all my carefully constructed arguments and academic achievements were like a child's wooden ladder propped against the sky, far too short to reach anything real. He revealed that he hadn't come to teach a better philosophy or provide a superior moral system. He had come to do something that no amount of human religion could accomplish, to bridge an uncrossable gap with his own body. I fell to my knees in the snow. 32 years of careful skepticism crumbled in an instant. I'd been so proud of my objectivity, my scholarly distance, my refusal to be swayed by emotional appeals. But standing before the reality of Christ, I understood that my skepticism hadn't been brave. It had been cowardice. It's much easier to dissect text than to surrender to truth. I begged him to let me stay. The peace I felt in his presence was unlike anything I'd experienced in 6 decades of life. No striving, no need to prove myself, no exhausting maintenance of my reputation. Just peace. Just rest. Just home. But he told me that I had to go back. He revealed that I had a message to deliver, a warning that needed to be spoken. He showed me that my death on Christmas Eve wasn't random, that I was being given a chance to use my voice, my platform, my remaining time for something that actually mattered. He took me forward, pulled back the curtain between now and what's coming, and let me see the year 2026 unfolding like a dark flower opening its petals. He showed me a massive iron door, ancient and heavy, the kind you might find in a medieval fortress. But this door wasn't part of any building I could see. It simply stood in space, huge and imposing, and it was closing. Not slamming shut with dramatic force, but sliding closed with the inexorable patience of continental drift. Slow, silent, and absolutely unstoppable. He revealed to me that this door represented something crucial, a window of grace that had remained open for generations but was now narrowing. He told me that while many believers wait for a single apocalyptic moment, the ending of ages often comes as a series of closures, doors that shut one by one until suddenly, without anyone quite noticing when it happened, the opportunity has passed. He showed me a specific date, January 11, 2026. He revealed that this would be when the door's movement would accelerate, when the gap between the open and closed positions would narrow significantly. He made clear to me that this wouldn't be marked by natural disasters or obvious calamities. No earthquakes would signal it. No tsunamis would announce it. Instead, it would happen in the invisible realm, in the spiritual architecture that underlies our physical reality. He told me that on this day, something would shift in the heavenly places. Decisions that had been postponed would be finalized. Angels that had been holding back judgment would step aside. Grace that had been extended again and again would begin its final withdrawal. And almost no one would notice, because the change would be invisible to physical eyes. What terrified me most was his revelation that this closing wouldn't be announced. There would be no trumpet blast, no voice from heaven warning everyone to hurry. The door would simply continue its patient, silent slide toward closure, and millions would continue their normal lives, unaware that their window of opportunity was narrowing with each passing hour. He showed me a forest, vast and beautiful, stretching across what I somehow understood to be America. The trees were enormous, magnificent specimens that looked healthy and strong. People gathered under these trees, laughing, taking photos, enjoying their shade. They looked so substantial, so permanent. Then he touched one of the trees, and its bark became transparent like glass. Inside, the tree was completely hollow, eaten away by termites and rot. Only the outer shell remained, a thin facade of health covering total decay. He moved through the forest touching tree after tree, and each time the same horror was revealed. Beautiful on the outside, dead within. He revealed to me that these trees represented a particular kind of religious person, those who maintain the appearance of faith without any internal reality. He showed me people who attend church every Sunday, who can quote scripture, who serve on committees and sing in choirs, but whose hearts remain utterly unchanged. He made me understand that this wasn't about people who struggled with faith or who had doubts. This was about something far more dangerous, a deliberate choice to maintain the social benefits and psychological comfort of religion while refusing to allow it to actually transform anything essential. He showed me businessmen who prayed before meals but engaged in ruthless exploitation of their workers. He revealed women who led Bible studies but nursed decades-old grudges, refusing forgiveness to people who'd wounded them years ago. He displayed pastors who preached eloquently about sacrifice while building personal empires. He made me see families who looked picture-perfect at church but whose homes were filled with violence, contempt, and emotional cruelty. What devastated me was recognizing myself in these hollow trees. For 32 years, I'd been surrounded by religious tradition, teaching about it, analyzing it, even appreciating its cultural value. But I'd never let it touch my heart. I'd kept it at arm's length, a specimen to study rather than a truth to embrace. I'd been hollow, perhaps the most hollow of all, because at least the others believed something. I'd believed in nothing but my own intellect. He told me that a storm was coming in 2026, winds that would test every structure, every foundation. He revealed that the hollow trees, no matter how impressive they looked, would be the first to fall. When the winds hit, they would snap like twigs, because there was no substance inside them to provide strength. The scene changed, and he showed me darkness, a vast field at midnight where millions of people stood holding candles. The tiny flames flickered in the darkness, each one a small point of light in an otherwise pitch-black world. I could see faces in the candlelight, ordinary people, some I even recognized from my own life. Then the wind began to blow. It wasn't a natural wind. He made me understand that this was something else, a spiritual force that would move through 2026 like a dark river. It was cold, so cold that even watching it in vision made me want to shiver. But it wasn't physical cold. It was the chill of despair, of confusion, of fear that grips the soul. He revealed to me that this wind would blow strongest in January, beginning around the 11th. He showed me how it would manifest in the physical world through a series of seemingly disconnected events. Economic reports that would unsettle markets without causing crashes. Political decisions that would create deep unease without being obviously catastrophic. International tensions that would ratchet up anxiety without breaking into open conflict. Medical news that would spread fear without being immediately devastating. He made me understand that none of these things individually would be apocalyptic, which was precisely what would make them so dangerous. People are prepared for obvious disasters. They know how to respond to earthquakes and hurricanes. But this would be different, a creeping sense of wrongness, of things slipping sideways, of foundations proving less stable than everyone had assumed. In the vision, I watched as the black wind blew across the field of people holding candles. Many of them were distracted, looking at their phones, arguing with neighbors, worrying about money, consumed by entertainment or anger or anxiety. When the wind hit their candles, the flames went out instantly. The darkness swallowed them, and their screams were terrible to hear. But there were others, and he made sure I paid attention to these. When they felt the wind beginning, they immediately protected their flames. Some fell to their knees, cupping their hands around the candles. Others turned their backs to the wind, using their bodies as shields. Still others huddled together in small groups, creating windbreaks for each other. The wind blew hard, brutally hard, but their flames stayed lit. He revealed to me what the candle represented: faith, but not faith as I'd understood it in my academic career. Not intellectual agreement with certain propositions. Not cultural identity or family tradition. He showed me that the candle was active trust, moment-by-moment dependence on his presence, a living connection that had to be consciously maintained and protected. He told me that the black wind of January 2026 would extinguish millions of these candles. He showed me churches that would empty as people's faith, which had never been rooted deeply, would simply blow away under pressure. He revealed families that would fracture as fear drove wedges between people who had never built their relationships on anything solid. He made me see individuals who would abandon everything they'd claimed to believe when the comfort and certainty they'd taken for granted began to crumble. But he also showed me something that gave me hope. He revealed that those who kept their flames burning, who protected their faith desperately and consciously, would become visible in the darkness. Their lights would shine brighter as the surrounding darkness deepened. He told me that these people would become beacons, gathering points for others stumbling in the dark. He made me understand that the wind was both judgment and mercy. Judgment because it would expose what was real and what was pretense. Mercy because it would wake people up, force them to decide what they actually believed before it was too late, before the door closed completely. The vision shifted again, and he showed me an ocean, dark and violent, with waves crashing down like the fists of an angry giant. The water was so cold it looked black, and the waves were unnaturally large, powerful enough to crush anything caught beneath them. In this ocean, I saw people swimming, or trying to swim. But they were weighted down with possessions. Some clutched enormous televisions, the latest models, expensive and desirable. Others clung to bags of gold, the metal glinting even in the dim light. Still others held tight to diplomas, framed degrees from prestigious universities. I saw men dragging luxury cars somehow, absurdly, through the water. I saw women refusing to let go of designer handbags and jewelry. The weight was drowning them. They kicked frantically, but the possessions pulled them down. I watched person after person slip beneath the waves, their hands still gripping whatever treasure they'd refused to release. The sound of their final gasps, the bubbles rising as water filled their lungs, it was horrific. He revealed to me that these people represented everyone who had placed their security in material wealth, in credentials, in status, in anything that couldn't survive the coming storm. He showed me that 2026 would begin a period where these things would prove hollow, where the securities people had built their lives upon would fail them when they needed those securities most. He made me see business owners who had built empires through exploitation, who had sacrificed relationships and integrity for profit, discovering that their money couldn't buy them out of the consequences. He showed me academics, and I felt the knife twist, knowing he was showing me myself, who had accumulated degrees and published prestigious papers but had never learned wisdom, never developed character, never built anything of eternal value. He revealed politicians who had pursued power at any cost, crushing anyone who stood in their way, finding that the influence they'd fought for was meaningless when real crisis came. He showed me celebrities whose entire identity was built on fame and public adoration, who would crumble when the fickleness of public attention became apparent. What made it so terrible was that he showed me how desperately they clung to these drowning weights. Even as they sank, even as water filled their mouths, they refused to let go. Their possessions, their achievements, their status had become their identity, and releasing them felt like ceasing to exist. So they chose to drown rather than surrender the weights. But in the middle of this dark ocean, he showed me something else. A boat. It was old, made of rough wood, simple in construction, maybe even a little beat up. Nothing elegant, nothing impressive, nothing that would make any wealthy person feel comfortable. But it floated. In that violent ocean, it rode the waves with perfect stability. He told me that he was the boat. He revealed that this simple vessel, this unimpressive refuge, was the only thing that would survive the storm. He showed me people in the water, drowning under their weights, who saw the boat and refused it. They shouted that it was too old-fashioned, too simple, too ordinary. They insisted they could swim on their own, that they didn't need such primitive help. And they sank. But he also showed me others who, feeling themselves going under, made the desperate choice to release their weights. They let go of the gold, dropped the diplomas, abandoned the status symbols. With empty hands, they reached for the boat, and he pulled them in. Once aboard, they were safe. The waves that had nearly killed them couldn't touch them. They were soaked, exhausted, grief-stricken over what they'd lost, but alive. He revealed to me that 2026 would force this choice on millions of people. The economic certainties that had persisted for decades would begin to shift. He showed me paper money blowing through streets like autumn leaves, people walking past it because it no longer held the value they'd assumed was permanent. He displayed gold, that ancient symbol of security, melting into mud, its worth evaporating under conditions I didn't fully understand but could see coming. He made clear to me that he wasn't causing these things out of cruelty or spite. He was allowing the facade to crack, allowing people to see that the securities they'd trusted were never real in the first place. It was mercy disguised as catastrophe, a chance to reach for something real before the final door closed. Then he took me to a canyon, vast and terrible, a crack in the earth so wide and deep that looking into it made me dizzy. On one side was dust and gray emptiness, a lifeless desert stretching to the horizon. On the other side was light, brilliant and beautiful, colors I'd never seen before, music I could almost hear, a place so alive it made our world look like a faded photograph. Between them was nothing but empty air and that terrible drop into darkness. All around the edge of the canyon, people were building ladders. They worked frantically, hammering planks together, lashing boards with rope, constructing increasingly elaborate structures. I could see the words they'd written on the rungs of their ladders: good deeds, charitable giving, religious observance, moral living, sincere effort. I saw Muslims constructing ladders of 5 times daily prayer and Hajj pilgrimages. I saw Buddhists building ladders of meditation and right action. I saw Hindus assembling ladders of karma and devotion. I saw atheists constructing ladders of human progress and rational thought. And yes, I saw Christians building ladders too, ladders of church attendance and Bible memorization and mission work and theological correctness. Everyone worked so hard. They sweated, they strained, they poured every ounce of effort into building their ladders higher. And one by one, they leaned them against the sky and began to climb. They climbed past the first rungs easily. They climbed past the middle with some effort. They reached the tops of their ladders, stretching out their hands toward the other side, reaching for heaven. And they fell. Every single one. The ladders were too short. They hung in empty air, reaching toward a goal they could never achieve, and the climbers tumbled off the ends, falling into that dark canyon, screaming as they dropped. I saw my own father there, a good man who had believed that his kindness and integrity would be enough. I saw my mother, who had attended church faithfully but had never understood grace, never grasped that her own goodness was insufficient. I saw colleagues, students, friends, all of them desperately climbing, all of them falling. Then he showed me something that broke me completely. He showed me my son David, the one I hadn't spoken to in 5 years, standing on the other side of the canyon. David had given up building ladders. He simply stood there, safely across, looking back at me with tears streaming down his face, calling my name, begging me to stop climbing and look for another way. All those years, I thought David was the foolish one, abandoning reason for emotional faith. But he'd been safe the entire time, and I'd been the fool, building my ladder of academic achievement and intellectual pride, certain it would reach heaven, too arrogant to see that it was far too short. Then he did the most extraordinary thing. He lay down. He stretched out his arms, and his body grew, extending across that entire impossible canyon. He became the bridge, his body spanning from the land of the dead to the land of the living. He looked at me and revealed that no one could build their way across, that every human ladder was insufficient, that the only way to reach the other side was to walk across his back. He told me that religion, all religion including most of what calls itself Christianity, is just ladder building, human effort trying to reach God. But he revealed that he hadn't come to teach better ladder construction. He had come to be the bridge himself, to do what no human effort could accomplish. He showed me people walking across him, stepping onto his shoulders, crossing the uncrossable gap on the road of his body. Some came with confidence, others with trembling uncertainty. Some practically ran across, while others crawled, weeping with gratitude and shame. But all who were willing to abandon their ladders and trust his bridge made it to the other side. He made me understand that this was the essential message I had to carry back. That 2026 would make the inadequacy of human ladders increasingly obvious, that the systems and structures and philosophies that people had trusted would show their insufficiency, and that time was running short for people to make the choice to abandon their own efforts and step onto the bridge he had become. As the vision of the canyon faded, he showed me one more crucial thing. He took me back to that dark field where millions stood with candles, but this time he showed me the mechanics of how the light was maintained. Each person had a small clay jar attached to their belt, and the jar contained oil. The oil fed the candles, kept them burning bright. He revealed to me what the oil represented, and it wasn't what I expected. The oil was two things held together, forgiveness and his word. He showed me that these two things, practiced and applied constantly, were what kept a person's faith alive when darkness pressed in. He made me see people whose oil jars had leaks. A woman who hadn't spoken to her sister in 15 years after a family argument. A man who nursed a grudge against his son for a disappointment decades old. A teenager who held anger toward parents who'd failed her. Each broken relationship was a crack in the jar, and oil dripped out, invisible but constant. Drip. 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 He revealed that when the black wind of 2026 began to blow, these people with leaking jars would find themselves empty. Their candles would go out not because they didn't want to believe, but because they had allowed unforgiveness to drain their oil away. Their faith, which should have been fed by constant grace, had been starved by bitterness, and there was nothing left to burn when the testing came. He also showed me people whose jars were full, but who had never actually poured oil on their candles. They owned Bibles but never opened them. They had access to his words but never consumed them. The oil sat in the jar, useless, while their candles burned down to nothing on their own wax, flickering and weak. Then he showed me the ones who kept their flames strong. They were pouring oil constantly, reading his words daily, speaking them aloud, teaching them to their children, meditating on them during ordinary moments. And they were actively forgiving, constantly releasing grudges, choosing mercy over vindication, pursuing reconciliation wherever possible. He revealed that these practices weren't religious busywork or legalistic requirements. They were the actual mechanics of spiritual survival. Just as a physical body needs food and water daily, a spirit needs the constant intake of his truth and the constant release of bitterness. Without both, the flame dies, no matter how much someone wants it to keep burning. He told me specifically to warn people that 2026 would test the oil supply. He showed me that the stresses coming, economic, social, political, relational, would drain oil faster than normal. Pressures would reveal cracks in jars that had seemed fine during easier times. The constant friction would require more oil to keep flames burning. He made clear that the time to fill the jars was now, before January 11th, before the black wind started blowing. He revealed that trying to fill a jar in the middle of the storm would be nearly impossible. The darkness would make it hard to see. The wind would spill oil as quickly as it was poured. The fear would make hands shake. He showed me families gathering together, reading scripture aloud to each other, speaking truth into the darkness of their living rooms. He revealed these scenes not as religious obligation but as fortification, the building of a fortress against what was coming. He made me see that a family that genuinely loved each other, that had forgiven each other fully, that fed daily on his truth together, was nearly impenetrable to the dark forces that would assault so many. He told me that this was the practical preparation that mattered more than stockpiling food or buying gold. He revealed that people would face starvation of the soul, not primarily of the body, and that no amount of canned goods would satisfy that deeper hunger. Finally, he showed me January 2026 from a different angle. Not the dramatic images of winds and waves and falling trees, but the subtle, daily experience of ordinary people living through what he called the spiritual winter. He revealed that most people wouldn't recognize anything apocalyptic happening. They would wake up, go to work, come home, watch television, go to sleep. Life would continue in its normal patterns. But underneath the ordinary surface, something would be fundamentally different. He showed me a couple sitting at their kitchen table, staring at bills, feeling an inexplicable anxiety they couldn't quite name. The numbers hadn't changed dramatically. The bills weren't catastrophically higher. But somehow, the security they'd always felt was gone, replaced by a creeping dread they couldn't shake. He revealed a mother lying awake at night, overwhelmed by worry for her children's future. Nothing specific had happened to trigger this fear. Her kids were fine, healthy, doing well in school. But she felt it anyway, a shadow passing over her heart, a certainty that something was wrong even though she couldn't point to evidence. He showed me workers in office buildings, staring at computer screens, suddenly aware that the work they'd devoted decades to felt meaningless. The company hadn't changed. Their responsibilities were the same. But the sense of purpose had evaporated, leaving them hollow, going through motions that now seemed absurd. He made me see that this was the spiritual winter settling in, a season where the light would dim, where warmth would drain from things that had seemed alive, where growth would stop and everything would enter a kind of suspended animation. And most people would attribute these feelings to economic uncertainty, political division, or personal stress. They wouldn't recognize the spiritual reality underneath. He told me that during this winter, darkness would sign papers in high towers. He revealed that decisions would be made, laws would be written, policies would be enacted, all of which would feel wrong to people with spiritual sensitivity but wouldn't be obviously evil enough to spark resistance. It would be death by 1,000 cuts, freedom and light receding one small degree at a time. He showed me news anchors reporting these developments in bland, professional voices, as if they were merely describing weather patterns rather than documenting the closing of the door. He revealed how people would watch these reports, feel vague unease, then distract themselves with entertainment or social media, never quite grasping what was actually happening. He made clear that this was strategic, that the enemy worked best in ambiguity, in the gray areas where people couldn't quite decide if they should be concerned. Obvious evil sparks resistance. Subtle corruption breeds passivity. And passivity, he revealed, was exactly what the dark forces wanted as the door continued its patient slide toward closure. But he also showed me that this spiritual winter was still within the season of grace. The door was closing but not yet closed. The winter was beginning but spring could still come for those who turned to him. What was happening was terrible but not yet final. There was still time, but that time was measured now in months, not years. In weeks, not decades. I don't remember the transition back to my body. One moment I was standing with him, absorbing these visions, and the next I was drowning in pain. My chest felt like someone had parked a truck on it. I couldn't breathe. A tube was jammed down my throat, and every attempt to inhale felt like swallowing broken glass. I opened my eyes to fluorescent lights and the steady beep of monitors. A nurse saw me wake and rushed to get a doctor. Within minutes, I was surrounded by medical professionals, all very pleased with themselves that I'd survived such a catastrophic accident. They told me I'd been legally dead for 4 minutes. They told me it was a miracle I had no brain damage. They asked if I was in pain. I couldn't speak because of the tube, but I was screaming inside. Not from physical pain, though that was substantial. I was screaming because I had been sent back with a message, and I had no way to deliver it. I had seen what was coming, understood what was at stake, and I was trapped in a broken body, unable to speak. For 3 days, I remained intubated, slowly healing. During those days, I begged him constantly in my mind to let me speak, to give me the strength to fulfill the mission he'd given me. I thought about my son David, about the years I'd wasted in pride and arrogance. I thought about my daughter Emma, whose wedding I'd missed for a conference that now seemed utterly meaningless. I thought about Helen, my ex-wife, who had tried so hard to reach my heart before finally giving up. I thought about my students, young people I'd spent years teaching to view faith as sophisticated superstition, intellectual weakness dressed up in robes and rituals. How many had I wounded? How many had I directed away from the narrow gate because I was too proud to admit I'd been wrong? When they finally removed the tube, my throat was raw and my voice was a harsh croak, but I could speak. The first thing I said was my son's name. They called David, and he came immediately, rushing to the hospital with his wife and their 2 young children I'd never met. When David walked into my room, he saw something in my face that made him freeze. I reached for his hand and whispered the words I never thought I'd say. You were right. About everything. Is real. I met him. David's face crumpled, and he started crying. He'd been praying for me for 5 years, his mother told me later. Every single day, he'd asked Jesus to reach his stubborn, proud father before it was too late. And on Christmas Eve, in a twisted car on a frozen river, his prayers were answered. I'm writing this on January 8, 2026. In 3 days, if what he showed me is accurate, the acceleration begins. The door will narrow significantly. The black wind will start to blow. The spiritual winter will deepen from early frost to genuine cold. I don't know if you'll believe me. I understand skepticism, I practiced it professionally for 3 decades. If someone had told me 6 months ago that I'd be writing about visions and divine encounters, I would have smiled condescendingly and recommended a psychiatric evaluation. But I know what happened to me. I know who I met. And I know what I was shown. To my former colleagues in academia, the ones who will read this and assume I've lost my mind, I say this: our cleverness means nothing. Our degrees are worthless ladders leaning against an unreachable sky. The bridge is a person, and his offering passage while the door is still open. Don't let your pride do to you what mine did to me.